The mob came to hide a body. But they made one fatal mistake. They didn't realize they were digging that grave for themselves. Never judge by appearances. The St. Jude cemetery didn't scare Elias. To him, the rows of weathered granite and weeping angels were far better company than the living. The living lied. The dead were honest. At 2 a.m., the fog usually rolled off the nearby river, blanketing the grounds in a thick, wet silence that muffled the distant hum of the highway. Elias sat on the steps of the maintenance shed, his breathing slow, rhythmic, almost matching the stillness around him. He wasn't a large man, not anymore. His frame was wiry, his shoulders slightly hunched from years of stooping over spades and pickaxes. But his hands were different. If you looked closely, his hands were steady, surgically steady. He wasn't digging tonight. He was reading. Under the weak yellow buzz of a single porch light, Elias flipped through a tattered paperback on botany. He loved the predictability of plants. A seed goes in, roots go down, life comes up. It was simple. It was clean. Unlike his previous life, where cause and effect were buried under layers of corruption and blood. He adjusted his glasses, wiping a speck of graveyard dust from the lens. A stray cat, a ragged black thing missing half an ear he called Bones, rubbed against his heavy work boots. Elias smiled, a rare expression that cracked his weathered face. "Hungry again," he whispered, his voice like gravel grinding together. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a strip of dried jerky. He fed the cat with a gentleness that seemed at odds with his rough appearance. This was his world now. A world of crickets, wet grass, and the heavy scent of damp earth. He knew every inch of these 40 acres. He knew which graves sank when it rained, which mausoleum doors creaked in the wind, and exactly how deep the frost line went in January. He had spent 5 years curating this piece, building a wall of solitude around himself. He was the keeper of the end, the final custodian for those who had finished their stories. He thought he had left the violence of the city behind him, buried deep under the paperwork of his resignation. But violence has a way of finding men who are good at it. As he turned the page, the heavy iron gates at the main entrance, 300 yards away, groaned open. The sound shattered the peace instantly. The cat hissed and bolted. Elias froze. He didn't turn his head. He just listened. The sound of tires crunching on gravel is distinct. It's a grinding, intrusive noise that doesn't belong in a place of rest, especially not at this hour. Elias closed his book slowly, placing it inside his jacket. He didn't reach for a weapon. He didn't have one. He simply melted into the shadows of the maintenance shed, his movements fluid and silent. 2 black SUVs, massive and sleek, rolled slowly down the main path, their high-beam headlights cutting through the fog like lightsabers. They weren't police vehicles. Police used lights and sirens. They announced their presence. These cars were prowling. They were predators. Elias watched from behind a stack of fertilizer bags. The car stopped near the unfinished plot in Section 4, the potter's field area where the soil was loose and the drainage was poor. The doors opened, and the silence of the night was violated by the slam of heavy metal and the scuff of expensive leather shoes on wet grass. 4 men stepped out. They wore dark suits that looked out of place against the mud. They were agitated, their whispers harsh and spiked with profanity. Then, the trunk of the lead SUV popped open. Elias felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach, a familiar sensation he hadn't felt in half a decade. They dragged something out. A long, heavy bundle wrapped in a thick industrial tarp. It wasn't a coffin. It was a body. Elias watched as they clumsily hauled the bundle toward the open grave he had dug earlier that afternoon for a scheduled pauper's burial the next day. The men were careless. They slipped in the mud, cursing the dirt, cursing the night, cursing the weight of their burden. One of them, a tall man with a shaved head and a neck tattoo, kicked the bundle when it snagged on a root. A low, muffled sound escaped the tarp. It wasn't the thud of dead weight. It was a groan. Elias's breath hitched. A whimper followed, high-pitched, terrified, and undeniably human. It cut through the damp air, chilling Elias more than the night wind ever could. They weren't disposing of a corpse. They were burying a witness. The sheer cruelty of it made Elias's hands clench into fists. He looked toward the main road. It was miles away. The guard shack was empty. He had no cell phone signal in this low-lying valley. The terror of the situation washed over him. Not for himself, but for the person wrapped in that plastic. He was just an old gravedigger against 4 armed cartel enforcers. He should stay hidden. He should survive. But the whimper came again, softer this time, fading. Elias crept closer, using the large marble headstones of the Victorian section as cover. He needed to be sure. He needed to see the evidence. He was no longer just a groundskeeper. His mind was shifting gears, the rust falling off the old machinery of his intellect. He focused on the details. The men were arguing about the depth of the hole. "Just dump it, Vinny. The dirt covers everything," one hissed. Elias ignored them and focused on the soil and the bundle. He was close enough now, maybe 20 yards away, to smell it. The wind shifted, carrying the scent from the open grave toward him. A layman would smell only wet earth and decaying leaves. But Elias Thorne, the former chief medical examiner for the state police, smelled something else. Underneath the scent of the loam, there was a sharp chemical tang. Amyl nitrite? No. Chloroform and bitter almonds. Cyanide? No, too faint. It was a heavy sedative cocktail. The kind used to knock someone out for transport, to simulate death by slowing the heart rate to a crawl. He looked at the soil around the bundle. The tarp was vibrating slightly. The frequency was rhythmic. Shivering. The body was reacting to the cold ground. Hypothermia will kill her before the suffocation does. His mind analyzed clinically. Subject is likely female, based on the size. Alive but fading. He reached into his breast pocket and his fingers brushed against a small, cold object he always carried. A silver challenge coin from the Forensic Science Academy. Veritas vos libera beat. The truth will set you free. He had quit the force because he couldn't save the victims on his table. He could only speak for them after they were gone. He had tired of the autopsy room, of seeing the end result of evil without ever being able to stop it. Tonight, the universe was playing a cruel joke. It was giving him a body that wasn't dead yet. It was giving him a second chance. The trembling in his hands stopped completely. His breathing shifted from the shallow intake of fear to the deep, oxygenating rhythm of preparation. The gravedigger vanished into the fog. The surgeon took his place. He scanned the area. He saw a shovel leaning against a tombstone. He saw the uneven terrain. He saw the physics of the engagement. 4 targets. Armed. Arrogant. Distracted. He didn't have a gun, but he knew exactly how much pressure it took to separate a cervical spine. He knew the fragile points of the human machine. He let go of the coin. The choice was made. Elias didn't charge in screaming. That was how heroes died in movies. Instead, he stepped out from behind the angel statue, dragging his left leg slightly, hunching his shoulders to appear smaller, older, more pathetic. He coughed, a wet, rattling sound that made the 4 men spin around. Guns drawn instantly. The silence of the graveyard shattered as 4 laser sights danced on Elias's chest. He didn't flinch. He just raised his trembling hands, holding a rusted lantern he had grabbed from the shed. He looked bewildered, the perfect picture of a terrified, senile old man who had stumbled into something he didn't understand. "Who's there?" Elias called out, his voice quavering with a pitch-perfect wobble. Is that the funeral home? You boys are early. The permit says dawn." He squinted against the blinding headlights, using one hand to shield his eyes, effectively hiding his scanning gaze. He shuffled forward, seemingly oblivious to the silenced pistols pointed at his heart. "I ain't got the paperwork signed yet. The boss will have my hide if the paperwork ain't right." The leader, the one with the neck tattoo, laughed. It was a cruel, barking sound. He lowered his gun slightly, signaling the others to relax. "Look at this, boys. It's the crypt keeper." The tension in the air dropped by 50%. They didn't see a threat. They saw a nuisance. A loose end to be tied up quickly. "Get lost, old man," the leader sneered. Go back to sleep, or we put you in the hole too. Elias kept walking, stumbling a bit over a tree root. He was closing the distance. 10 yards. 8 yards. I just want no trouble, Elias mumbled, getting closer to the grave. I see you got a package. Is it a double depth? The soil here. It's clay. Hard to dig. He was rambling, boring them, making them lower their guard even further. He was now 5 yards away. He could see the girl's hair spilling out of the tarp. Blonde. Mopped with mud. He could see the rise and fall of her chest. I said, beat it. The closest thug, a bulky man in a cheap suit, stepped forward to shove Elias back. He holstered his weapon to use 2 hands for the push. That was the mistake. Elias looked up, his eyes locking onto the thugs. The confused old man facade evaporated instantly. The fear in Elias's face was replaced by a look of absolute terrifying calm. Clay, Elias whispered, his voice suddenly stripped of the wobble, dark and hard as iron. It's heavy. And it traps sound. The thug's hands made contact with Elias's chest, intending to shove the old man into the mud. In that split second, Elias didn't stumble back. He rotated. His movement was a blur of kinetic efficiency. Elias trapped the thug's right arm, stepping inside his guard with the speed of a striking cobra. With a precise, agonizing leverage, he snapped the man's elbow backward. The sound was like a dry branch breaking, a sickening pop that echoed off the tombstones. The thug didn't even have time to scream before Elias drove the heel of his palm upward, striking the man directly under the chin. It wasn't a brawler's punch. It was an anatomical strike designed to rattle the brainstem. The man's eyes rolled back, and he collapsed like a marionette with cut strings. Elias caught the falling body and spun it around, using the unconscious thug as a human shield just as the other 3 men opened fire. Thwip thwip thwip. Silenced bullets thudded into the back of the unconscious man's suit. Elias didn't panic. He held the dead weight with surprising strength, moving backward toward the open grave. Down, he shouted to the girl in the tarp, hoping she could hear him through the fog of drugs. He shoved the unconscious thug toward the shooters, creating a momentary stumbling block, and dove into the shallow trench beside the girl. The shock on the remaining 3 faces was palpable. They had expected a gardener. They were fighting a ghost. Elias landed in the mud next to the victim. He ripped the tarp away from her face. She was young, maybe 20, her lips blue, eyes fluttering. Stay down, he commanded, his voice commanding and sharp. He checked her pupil response with a flick of his lighter. Sluggish, but reactive. Get him. Kill him. The leader screamed, his voice cracking with rage. They advanced, moving tactically now, realizing this was a combat scenario. But Elias was already moving. He wasn't just hiding in a hole. He was assessing his inventory. He had the girl. He had the mud. And he had a cemetery full of heavy, sharp objects. He grabbed a handful of the wet, clay-heavy soil. It wasn't a weapon to a soldier, but to a forensic expert who knew about grit and corneas, it was a blinding agent. He waited for the footsteps to get close. He wasn't the prey anymore. He was the lion waking up. The gunfire suppressed them, chewing up the edge of the grave, sending sprays of dirt and grass raining down on Elias and the girl. She let out a sharp gasp, her eyes snapping open in terror. Quiet, Elias hissed, pressing a finger to his lips. I need you to listen to me. I'm going to get you out, but you have to be dead for a few more minutes. Can you do that? She nodded frantically, tears cutting tracks through the dirt on her face. Elias peeked over the rim of the grave. The 3 men were fanning out, trying to flank him. One was moving left toward the weeping willow. The leader and another were coming straight down the center. Elias needed to separate them. He looked at the girl. Crawl to the other end of the trench. Stay under the lip. He grabbed a rusted layout spike, a heavy iron rod used to mark plot corners, that had been left in the dirt. Cover me, the leader shouted. The man on the left broke cover, rushing toward a large granite mausoleum to get a side angle on the grave. This was Elias's chance. He didn't wait to be flanked. He vaulted out of the grave, not away from the danger, but toward the man running for the mausoleum. It was a move of pure aggression that caught them off guard. The runner saw Elias emerging from the fog like a wraith. He tried to raise his gun, but Elias threw the iron spike. He didn't throw it like a baseball. He threw it like a knife. The heavy rod spun through the air and struck the man's leading shin with bone-shattering force. The man howled, crumbling to the ground. Elias was on him in 2 strides. He didn't kill him. He neutralized him. A swift kick to the temple silenced the scream. But now Elias was exposed. "There!" the leader yelled. Bullets chipped the stone angel next to Elias's head, sending marble shrapnel flying. A shard sliced Elias's cheek, hot blood mixing with the rain. He grabbed the fallen man's weapon, a high-end customized pistol, but didn't fire. He checked the mag full. He dragged the unconscious man behind the mausoleum, using the stone structure as a fortress. He was pinned. 2 shooters left. 1 hostage in the hole. And the girl was starting to cough, the cold air irritating her drug-filled lungs. The cough echoed in the silence. The leader heard it. "She's in the hole. Flush her out." Elias knew he couldn't stay behind the mausoleum. If they got to the grave, the girl was dead. He looked at the heavy iron door of the crypt behind him. It was locked, rusted shut for 50 years. He looked at the gun in his hand. He wasn't a marksman, not like a SWAT sniper, but he was an anatomist. He knew where to aim to make a man stop moving. But he had to teach the girl to save herself first. "Hey!" Elias shouted, his voice echoing off the stones, intentionally bouncing it so it was hard to locate. "You want the girl? Come and get her. But you should know. You're standing on the hollow ground. Shut up." The leader fired blindly into the fog. Elias stripped off his heavy work coat and draped it over a shovel handle he found propped against the crypt. He wedged it into the soft earth so it stood upright, a shadowy silhouette in the mist. Then he crawled on his belly through the wet grass, circling back toward the grave. He whispered to the girl as he slid back into the hole, startling her. "Listen to me," he breathed, his voice intense. "They are going to shoot at the shadow. When they do, I need you to run. Not to the road. To the chapel. The stone walls are 3 feet thick. Can you run?" "My legs. They feel heavy," she stammered. "Adrenaline will fix that," Elias said calmly. "I'm going to create a distraction. A science lesson." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small flask of high-concentration ammonia he used for cleaning lichens off the old stones. He grabbed a handful of dry leaves and ripped a piece of fabric from his shirt. Ammonia and bleach make chloramine gas. But ammonia and fear? That just makes panic. He didn't have bleach, but he had the ammonia and the psychological warfare. He tossed the flask toward the approaching men. It smashed against a rock near their feet. The pungent, eye-watering scent exploded into the air. Chemicals. Elias screamed. Trap. Gas. It was a bluff, a total lie, but in the dark with the smell stinging their nostrils, the untrained hitmen panicked. They flinched, covering their faces, coughing. "Run!" Elias yelled to the girl. She scrambled out of the hole, stumbling toward the old stone chapel. The movement drew their fire. The ruse only bought seconds. The leader realized it wasn't lethal gas quickly. Wiping his streaming eyes, he saw the girl limping toward the chapel. Forget the old man. Get the girl. The 2 remaining gunmen turned their backs on Elias, sprinting after the witness. She was slow, groggy. They would catch her before she reached the heavy oak doors. Elias stood up. He was 40 yards away. He raised the captured pistol. His hand was steady, but the distance was great, and the fog was thick. If he missed, they would kill her. If he hit them, he gave away his position with no cover. He looked at the girl. Innocent, terrified, fighting for a life she barely understood. He thought of the daughter he had lost years ago to an overdose, the failure that had driven him to this graveyard. He couldn't save his own blood, but he could save this stranger. He stepped out into the open path, completely exposed. He didn't fire at them. He fired into the air. Bang! 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 The muzzle flash was a lighthouse in the dark. "Over here, you cowards!" he roared, his voice thundering like the lion he was named for. "Face me. I'm the one who hurt your men. Look at me." It worked. The insult, the noise, the sheer audacity of it. The two gunmen stopped, turning away from the girl. The leader sneered, raising his rifle. "Have it your way, old man." Elias stood his ground. He didn't run. He locked his knees, raised the pistol and aimed. He knew he was going to take a hit. He accepted it. It was a calculated exchange. His life for her time. As the leader's finger tightened on the trigger, Elias exhaled. He fired. He saw the second gunman spin, hit in the shoulder. But then the leader's rifle barked. Elias felt a sledgehammer hit his chest. The breath was driven from him. The world tilted. He fell backward onto the wet grass, looking up at the gray, swirling sky. The pain was distant, dull. So this is what it feels like, he thought. Cold. The leader walked toward Elias, laughing. Stupid hero. He stood over the fallen gravedigger, aiming the rifle at Elias's head for the execution shot. Elias gasped, blood bubbling at the corner of his lips. He watched the barrel align with his forehead. He didn't close his eyes. He glared. Suddenly, a siren wailed, not from the road, but from the chapel. The girl had made it. She had triggered the silent alarm panel in the vestry. Blue and red lights began to reflect off the low clouds in the distance. The police were coming. The leader cursed, looking back at the chapel, then down at Elias. "You're dead anyway," he spat. But Elias wasn't dead. The bullet had hit the silver challenge coin in his breast pocket, the Forensic Academy coin. It had shattered his ribs, yes, and the impact had knocked him down, but the coin had stopped the heart shot. Elias's hand shot up. He didn't have the gun anymore. He had a handful of graveyard dirt. He threw it straight into the leader's eyes. The man screamed, blinded by grit. Elias kicked upward, a desperate, powerful thrust of his boot into the man's knee. The joint shattered. The leader collapsed, firing wildly into the ground. Elias rolled, ignoring the agony in his chest, and grabbed the rifle barrel. He wrenched it away. He stood over the leader, swaying, battered, covered in mud and blood. "Stay down," Elias wheezed. The sound of helicopters filled the air. SWAT teams were breaching the gate. Snipers on the perimeter fence had laser dots dancing on the scene. "Drop the weapon," a voice boomed from a megaphone. Elias dropped the rifle instantly. He raised his hands, his knees shaking. He looked toward the chapel. The girl was standing in the doorway, safe. She was pointing at him, screaming to the police. "He saved me. Don't shoot him. He saved me." Elias collapsed to his knees, not from surrender, but from exhaustion. The adrenaline was fading, leaving only the pain and the cold. He looked at the gravestones around him. They seemed to nod in approval. The scene was chaos. Paramedics were cutting open Elias's shirt, revealing the massive bruise on his chest and the dented silver coin embedded in his skin. The police chief, a gray-haired veteran named Miller, walked over to the ambulance. He looked at the battered gravedigger. He squinted, then his eyes went wide. "Thorne." Miller whispered. "Elias Thorne. We thought you were. We thought you moved to Alaska." Elias coughed, wincing. "I like it here, Miller. It's quiet." The girl, wrapped in a shock blanket, broke through the police line. She grabbed Elias's hand. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice trembling. "You fought like a soldier." Miller answered for him. "He wasn't a soldier, Mississippi. He was the best forensic pathologist the state ever had. They used to call him the surgeon, because he could take apart a crime scene better than anyone could take apart a body. He put away half the guys in maximum security before he vanished." Elias pulled his hand away gently. "I'm just the gravedigger," he said softly. 3 weeks later. The cemetery was quiet again. The girl, the daughter of a federal judge, had survived and testified. The cartel cell was dismantled. Elias sat on the steps of the shed, feeding the one-eared cat, Bones. He wasn't wearing his old overalls. He had a new jacket, a gift from the girl. A black sedan pulled up. Chief Miller stepped out, holding a manila folder. "The city wants you back, Elias. We need the surgeon. We have a case that—" Elias didn't even look up. He turned the page of his botany book. "The surgeon is retired, Miller. The plants need tending. And the dead, they need someone who listens." Miller watched him for a long moment, then smiled, nodded, and placed the file on the bench. "If you change your mind, the sleeping lion doesn't stay asleep forever." Miller drove away. Elias watched the car disappear. He looked at the file, then at the piece of the graveyard. He picked up the file, slid it into his book to mark his place, and walked into the mist. The legend was back, but on his own terms.